Welcome to the Swine Health Black Belt Podcast, the latest news and information in swine health research digested for you. My name is Dr. Clayton Johnson. I'm your host for today's episode, and it's my pleasure to have joining me in the podcast studio today for today's episode, Dr. Onyekachukwu Henry Osemeke, a veterinarian and a master's degree holder who is currently pursuing graduate research at Iowa State University. Welcome to the podcast, Henry.
Thank you so much, Clayton. I'm happy to be here.
Please, Henry, if you would, give our audience a little bit of background on yourself. What is your education journey? What do you study currently at Iowa State? And what are your goals?
Awesome. Thank you, Clayton. Like you said, my name is Onyekachukwu Henry Osemeke. I'm from South Nigeria. I got my DVM in 2014 from the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. After which I worked about a year in a government clinic and then went into private practice for a while. In 2017, I joined the National Veterinary Research Institute in Nigeria. It's the only veterinary research institute in Nigeria where I worked for a few months in the viral vaccine production unit. And then I was moved to research. In research, I was opportunity to do some on-field studies, in-lab studies with a couple of pathogens in collaboration with other countries and with some bodies. So worked on FMD, on ASF, on PPR, a host of pathogens. In 2020, spring of 2020, I joined Dr. Daniel Linhares' lab as a graduate student, as a grad student. I got my master's last year, and I'm currently on my PhD. My PhD thesis focuses on improving practical ways of improving surveillance in weaning age pig populations here in the US. That would be that's my primary research. That's where my thesis is centered on.
And that's exactly, Henry, what I want to chat with you about today is determining specifically PRRS status of wean age pigs in our farms here in the United States. We have PRRS challenges. We have new PRRS viruses who attack our industry all the time. Producers of all shapes and sizes are forced into PRRS elimination situations. And we have to understand the status of the wean pig in order to know when the PRRS elimination has been successful. We know the wean age pig is the last population on the farm to harbor the PRRS virus, the last source of infection. So when that population is negative, we know it is safe to bring in gilts. We know it is safe to say the farm has eliminated the wild type PRRS. Could you talk a little bit, Henry, about the sample types that are used to evaluate wean age pigs for PRRS, and then your research onto maybe novel sample types that we can use?
Yeah, thank you, Clayton. Like you mentioned, not only is that subpopulation really important in knowing the health status of the breeding herd, but oftentimes that same population is what moves out from that area to a different area. So that's really important, especially when we're talking about the spread, general epidemiology of PRRS. Our toolbox for surveillance in this population is really scanty. Mm-hmm. The preferred sample type is the serum sample, as you already know. The challenge with that sample type is it's impractical to frequently monitor with the sample type, especially at low prevalence. And that's why the work of Marcel Almeida, was to validate farmed oral fluids. He showed that this is a really cost-efficient option, right? So we're trying to address, basically with these sample types, my research is focused on trying to see how do we address some of these problems with using sample types. One of the problems is cost. You know, even though farmed oral fluid samples are cost efficient, when herds have low prevalence of PRRS and they need to sample so many, especially large herds that have so many rooms and very large number of liters, it's quite cost prohibitive to test each of those liters singly, right? And then that's why one of the, at least the last publication we had from our team was centered on investigating pooling, right? How is that going to save cost to the producer, right? And the team is also moving towards trying to validate other sample types, right? So if you don't want to use FOF, how do you use oral swabs, nasal swabs? What are the sample sizes you're going to use? So that's one of the projects I'm currently on, trying to see how to introduce more sample options into the PRRS surveillance toolbox for weaning age pigs.
Very good. The population-based samples, Henry, have taken off over the last 5 to 10 years, starting with Jeff Zimmerman and Dr. Prickett's work on oral fluids, not family oral fluids, but oral fluids, and then your lab and others' work on the processing fluids. What are our population-based sample options for the wean age pigs? Those samples that are maybe a little easier to collect or at least less time-consuming to collect, and give us one PCR across a broader population than we can do by the traditional individual animal serum sampling.
Okay, so we have the aggregate sample types or the population-based sample type for wean age pigs. At least the sample type that is validated, to the best of my knowledge, is the family oral fluid, and that's collected at the level of the litter, right? So you have one of those samples for each litter. That's, I think, would be the only population-based sample type for that age group. The processing fluids have been shown to be really, at least head sensitive, aside the fact that it does not require labor, has so many advantages, but it does not represent the status of that subpopulation, the weaning age pigs, right? And we've seen from studies before, some studies that have already been published, that for a herd, the RT-PCR results for the processing age pigs do not always match that of the weaning age pigs, right? So it's very important that we actually check that population, but we do not have, to the best of my knowledge, it's just the family oral fluid that's the aggregate sample type used for weaning age pigs.
What does the family part of the term mean, Henry? It's family oral fluids, and it's collected at the litter level, but does family imply that the sow contributes to the sample as well?
Exactly, that's what it means. The sow contributes. The first set of trials that Dr. Almeida did, and he did that in collaboration with Dr. Zimmerman, is trying to see, is there a way to get just from the litters, right? Just tie the rope in a place that the sow would not have access to this rope, and see what the interaction of the rope, what the interaction would be with the litter. And they saw that it's more efficient if you allow the sow also interact with the rope, because then the piglets see that the sow is interacting with the rope and then go ahead to interact with the rope too, right? So that's the concept of the family. The sow is involved in the chewing of the rope.
Very good. And how is the sample collection for the family oral fluids different from a regular oral fluid? Are there challenges with getting the piglets to contribute to the sample? And if so, what are your recommendations for producers and veterinarians on how to practically collect those samples?
Yes. One challenge generally with oral fluids is you need the pigs to voluntarily interact with these ropes, right? So you want to tie the ropes or get the ropes there at a point where there is an increased likelihood that the pigs are going to interact with this rope. And from the studies Almeida has done, and also other members of the group, we see that it's important that you go as early as possible before the pigs have had their fill of feed for the early part of the day. That's one really, really important consideration. Then from the practical aspect, I see an increased success if you use only one of the strands of because most of the cotton rope we use most times come in a cord of 3 pieces, right? There's increased success if you unravel one of them and tie it there. From my experience, I see that if you leave the 3-piece cord there, and even after interaction with the sow and the piglets, you may have all the oral fluid soaked within the rope, and it may be difficult to get that out, right? You have to remember that with family oral fluids, you have fewer pigs interacting with the rope. It's just a sow and the members of her litter that are interested in interacting with the rope, as opposed to the oral fluid where there is at least in the pens, in growing sites, where there is almost a form of mania with the the pigs rushing towards the ropes. So that said, I think in summary, go as early as possible, use one cord, and tie it at a point where the smallest piglet in that leader would have access to the rope. So about the shoulder height of the smallest piglet there. I think there is actually a published guideline by Dr. Almeida. I think it's available online. I think it clearly stipulates some of the points I'm mentioning now. So strategy is everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know from my conversations with Dr. Almeida, hanging the ropes can be too short of a time or too long of a time. If you hang the ropes in the morning and come back in the afternoon, the pigs may have played with the ropes in the morning, but especially on a day like today where it's very hot and there's going to be a lot of pigs taking a nap throughout the day in the farrowing house, you come back in the afternoon, that rope could be completely dry by that point. So I think, targeting like a 1 hour time frame to allow the pigs to chew, but then come back to get that rope at kind of the peak of its level of moisture and saturation will help a lot.
Yeah.
Henry,
that's true.
You guys have ongoing work, I know, with family oral fluids, and hopefully that can help us to dial in a guideline, so to say, what parity, how many litters, those sorts of things. Will you have a publication coming out in the future that can help to get us to a more standard recommendation on the family oral fluids for pigs at weaning to understand status?
Yes, I think at least for the few points you've mentioned, there are already published literature. Almeida demonstrated that there is an increased likelihood of detecting PRRS if you sampled family oral fluids from priority 1 sows, that is gilt liters, right? He demonstrated that, he showed that there are higher odds in getting those. And he also showed in that same publication, the odds for detecting PRRS were higher for litters that had fewer pigs, right? I think that's available. I think that was on preventive veterinary medicine. What I did was to investigate pooling, right? Pooling as an option. So you have X number of you've done a calculation and you know that, okay, you have to sample about 50 crates and your testing budget does not meet that. What happens when you pool, right? We already know that one of the biggest fears with pooling is that the positive sample is going to be diluted and then at least beyond the sensitivity of the PCR. So we try to calculate what happens if you dilute to 1:3, in which case you have 1 part positive and 2 part negative. We did that up to 1:20 and showed what happened. And then we tried to come up with practical sample sizes with this in mind. And that publication is already out. It's in Preventive Veterinary Medicine. I think it came out last month. It's peer reviewed. And we've also gone further we have used those simulations, those calculations, and put that up on the Field Epi website, the Iowa State University Field Epi website, where you can go there. You can put in the number of liters in your room, the number of crates you want to sample from. You assume prevalence, how many crates you think should be positive, and then at what pooling level you want to get those samples at, how many samples you want to collect. So for example, in a room that has 50 crates, do you want to sample just 5 pools of 3? If that's your decision, this is the probability to detect. Are you comfortable with that? So it gives you the probability and helps you with a sampling decision. That's already published. The work we have, and that's already available on the Field Epi website. The next layer of work we're trying to do is to populate that that sample size calculation sites with more tabs where producers can go there and see what happens if you want to use nasal swabs, what happens if you want to use oral swabs, what happens if you want to use ear, vein, blood swabs, all your sample options, how many you should collect based on the assumptions, the epidemiological assumptions. Are you okay with the 90% confidence for detecting what error level are you comfortable with? What do you think is your current prevalence? So those will be put there, and the aim or the goal is to help swine practitioners be able to at least understand the probability of detecting based on their choices. And maybe you go up there, you wanted to calculate for family oral fluids, and then you decide, I want to use another sample option based on what I have, based on time I have, and based on the probability to detect. So have everything there and make a decision. So that's where I am now. Where the team is now. Yeah.
One of the things I really appreciate about your work and all of your colleagues at Iowa State University is you appreciate the economic approach. Farms are businesses, right? And businesses have to monitor their costs. And you not only look at it from the scientific standpoint of what is the best way to get the right answer, but also, the pooling, right? You think practically. Yeah. These producers are working within a budget, and you're always balancing the cost of the testing with the sensitivity. And I always tell people, if you give me an unlimited budget, I'll be an amazing veterinarian, but that's not practical, right? That's not the real world. And I appreciate you guys going to that next step to not just define the science behind what is the sample strategy, but then try to optimize it economically for producers as well.
True.
Henry, thank you very much for coming on. And thank you to everybody else for listening to the Swine Health Black Belt podcast. Please, if you have not, go visit us at swinehealthblackbelt.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. Henry, I hope you're signed up and subscribing and listening every week so that you don't miss out on our next episode here. For Onyekachukwu Henry Osemeke, I am Clayton Johnson. Thanks very much for joining us and have a great rest of your week.
Hey everyone. We're always searching for the latest and greatest research to share each week. If you have a swine health-related research trial and would like to come on the show to talk about it with me and share it with our audience, feel free to send an email to healthblackbelt@swineit.com, and we would love to take a look at your research.